The voice of sharing Durian ASEAN.
Welcome back again to Durian ASEAN. I'm Arlene here, your host for Durian ASEAN, and we have here Melissa, Sasidaran, lawyers and also a member of the Bar Council Constitutional Law Committee.
Hi everyone.
Hi. So now we'll be talking on a subject that is dear to your heart, which is about constitutional institutions as well as the separation of power. Before we start with you explaining what is constitutional institution and the separation of power, especially in relation to Malaysia, maybe you can introduce the organization that you are with and how it came about.
Well, the My Constitution campaign is actually a campaign under the Bar Council Constitutional Law Committee of Malaysia. Now, this campaign was launched actually in 2009. And the reason why we came up with such a campaign is because we felt the need to create constitutional awareness amongst all layers of Malaysians, regardless of ages. And we felt that the timing was right because people were becoming more aware of what's happening in Malaysia, and also there was a lot more public discourse as compared to 10 years ago. So that's why we felt that with all these questions that were being asked, the answers all can be found in the Constitution. So that's why this campaign came about.
Okay, so when it started, by the way?
2009.
2009. So what was the campaign? What was the social awareness level within the masses when you started this campaign?
Well, when we first started the campaign, it was truthfully the awareness was quite low, even amongst lawyers, because the Federal Constitution is a complicated document. That even lawyers struggle to understand it. Even myself, when I first started, it was a bit hard for me to digest, which is why one of the main things we came up with to simplify the contents of the Federal Constitution is a series of what we call the Rakyat Guides. It's essentially a booklet that simplifies and condenses 9 main parts of the Federal Constitution.
Yeah, I can see it is very colorful.
It is very colorful. It is very simple. We drafted it as simple as we could so that even children, school-going children, can understand it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, who is not trained in anything to do with the law, not even a lawyer, but I can definitely understand very clearly on all the things that is being written here.
Well, that's good to know. We have gotten feedback from lecturers from local private universities colleges, for example, saying that in teaching constitutional law subjects, they use our Rakyat Guides first as an introduction to them, and then once they are familiar with it, they go on to actually studying the Constitution itself.
I see. So when it comes to the My Consti work, what kind of activities that you do?
Well, since even before our launch, actually, we have done many workshops, talks, seminars all over the country, even as far as Sabah, Sarawak. And we have also gone into schools to teach them either on certain parts of the constitutions that are relevant to them. For example, when we were in the Sabah and Sarawak, we focused more on the Sabah Sarawak aspect of the constitution. And also, when we brought the campaign to NGOs, for example, we dealt with areas that were of more concerning what they do. For example, on the fundamental liberties. Fundamental liberties meaning your rights and, for example, your freedom to expression, freedom of religion, and things like that. So that's what we have been doing so far. And to date, I've lost count of how many workshops and talks we have given, but I would say that we have been quite consistent, and whenever we receive an invitation, we definitely do try and accommodate.
I see. Talking about the current state of the Malaysian the Malaysian constitution and the system itself, being part of this My Consti, I'm sure you have greater awareness on how bad or how good it is. I mean, maybe you can explain more about it.
Well, the awareness over the years since we started the campaign has definitely improved tremendously, to the point that right now, I think we have our partners, we call them, such as NGOs, actually helping us spreading the messages in the Constitution in their own trainings and workshops that they conduct. So the awareness is definitely increasing, and even amongst politicians, we see them speaking a lot more of the constitutions. Politicians from both sides of the divide, whether or not their interpretation is something that you agree with, is up for discourse. Is up for discussion.
Can you explain to me more about all the different pamphlets that you have here?
Okay. Well, the first one starts with what is the Federal Constitution, which is just an introduction. And the second one is on the constitutional institutions and the separation of powers. The third one is on federal-state relations. What are things that the federal government controls, and what are the things that where the state have the power over it. The fourth one is on Parliament. How a bill is tabled, for example, how laws are made. The fifth one is on the executive meaning the government. The sixth one is on the judiciary. Seventh is on Sabah and Sarawak. And the eighth is on... sorry.
Yeah, never mind.
And the ninth one is on the elections and democracy.
Yeah. We'll go back on the eighth one later. But I'm just curious, like how can we lay our hands on this? It seems to be like very colorful. I don't know whether you sell it or is it available for free?
Well, it's available for a donation of RM6 for a whole set of 9. You can get it from the Bar Council. If you Google the Malaysian Bar, you will find our address, or you can go to our website www.perlembagaanku.com or our Facebook page, My Constitution. And also, if you attend our workshops or talks and seminars, you can get it from us from there.
Okay, that's good. You also have it in soft copy, right?
We also have it in soft copy, yes, on our website, perlembagaanku.com.
Okay. So,
on that note, we also have a My Consti application on the iTunes store, and the Android one is coming out soon.
Okay. So, moving forward to the questions the question on constitutional institutions and also the separation of power. Can you please explain what is constitutional institution for us laymen here?
Okay. Well, constitutional institutions actually sound a lot more complicated than it really is. To understand it, first let's look at what is the Constitution. The Constitution, or the Federal Constitution, is basically the rule book of Malaysia, and it lays out how a country, or Malaysia specifically, should be governed. It lays out the democratic systems of our country, and most importantly, it lays out our rights as citizens of Malaysia. So, and institutions is basically the organs that run the country according to the constitutions. So, there are 3 main constitutional institutions. The first is the legislature, or also known, in layman terms as the parliament. Then we have the executive, which in layman terms we call it the government. We also have the judiciary, or the courts. And what the legislature does is it makes laws, and then the government executes those laws, and then the judiciary decides on those laws. So these are the 3 main constitutional institutions. There are actually a few others, but these are the 3 main organs, I would say.
I see. So when it comes to the constitutional institution, why do you think it is important?
It is important because it lays out how a country ought to be run. Like, for example, the parliament consists of the YDPA, the Dewan Rakyat, and the Dewan Negara. What they do is they make laws, they amend laws, they abolish laws. The constitution says what the parliament can or cannot make and the procedures for making those laws. And when it comes to the government again consists of the YDPA. You'll find the YDPA overlaps with all three institutions. And also it consists of the Prime Minister, Cabinet Minister, and the Public Services. These are the people that actually executes those laws that have been made by the Parliament. And then the courts, well, we have, of course, we have the civil courts and the Sharia courts and the native courts. Each of these courts have their own powers and functions, which we'll discuss in detail in the later installments.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to the separation of power, to begin with, what is a separation of power?
Okay. Now, for separation of power, as mentioned earlier, we have three main constitutional institutions, and they each have their own separate functions and duties accorded to them under the Constitution. And the idea behind this is to provide a system of check and balance. Say, for example, I give you an example, say there is only one institution that governs the country. We call it Institution X. For example, Institution X makes a law that says that you can't sing out loud any One Direction songs. Say you are arrested for it. Who do you complain to? You know, because you would be complaining to the same body that make the laws. Mm-hmm. So that's why we have this system of separation of power to provide a check and balance on each other.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain more deeply on the separation of all the powers that is involved?
Let me explain on how these constitutional institutions check each other's powers. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, the Parliament checks on the government in this manner. Your MPs in Parliament can require the Prime Minister or the Cabinet to come and explain what the government has done or has not done. For example, when you table the Auditor's General report, you can ask the Cabinet to come and explain the discrepancies. If Cabinet acts against the wishes of the Dewan, then the Dewan Rakyat can pass a motion of no confidence against the Prime Minister. Then the Prime Minister and his Cabinet should then resign. Here, the Dewan Rakyat, as mentioned, is the Parliament, ensures that the government acts in the best interest of the Rakyat. And also, say for example, how are these powers of the government checked by the courts? Well, the courts can review actions of the government, and as mentioned earlier, the Constitution is the rule book of Malaysia, meaning any action taken by the government cannot go against the federal constitution. So the courts are there to provide a check and balance on those actions to prevent abuses.
I'm just wondering, when you say that the constitution, the government has to abide by the constitution, but many cases that involved in Malaysia seems to suggest otherwise. How that so happen?
That is why we have the recourse of going through the courts to provide that check and balance. The court will decide if a piece of legislation or a use of power by the government has been abused, and if that abuse of power or that piece of legislation is contrary to what is stated in the Constitution.
Has any case been done before in terms of trying to check the executive power?
Well, the most recent one, I would say, one of the most recent would be, for example, the Peaceful Assembly Act, which was hastily passed in Parliament. Now, the Federal Constitution provides for freedom of expression, freedom of movement and all that, freedom of assembly. But and so the Parliament, pursuant to that, has enacted a piece of legislation called the Peaceful Assembly Act. Now, the name Peaceful Assembly Act seems to suggest that the government wants to allow you to exercise those rights to peacefully assemble. However, there are provisions in there which are being challenged in court right now. Provisions such as the notification period. It was argued that the provision to require 10 days of notification before you can hold an assembly is unconstitutional because it does not provide for example, spontaneous assembly, or it doesn't allow you to address issues that were urgent.
Mm-hmm. Talking about the executive here, can you explain more about the power the amount of power that an executive should have, and what kind of power that the current Malaysia executive that have right now that is beyond their actual power?
Okay. In 1988, there was actually a judicial crisis in Malaysia where Parliament amended the constitution to remove the power of the judiciary. Just a bit of historical background on this. Prior to 1988, it was stated in the Federal Constitution in Article 121 that the judicial power of the Federation shall vest in 2 high courts of coordinate jurisdiction. So, meaning the judicial power rests in the High Court. In 1988, this power was removed actually, and now the courts only have the power to decide on things in which the Parliament has allowed them to do so. So their powers have been limited in that sense. And in 1988, that created a judiciary crisis because with this position, the courts were no longer able to provide that check and balance, against the Parliament.
Mm-hmm. So it affected not just during that period of time, but until now.
Until today, there are certain things that are not reviewable by the courts. For example, book ban. You can review the administrative procedures of it, but the discretion of it is not reviewable. So things like that.
So that means they can ban any book they like without having some sort of explanation?
It is up to the minister's discretion, yes.
I see. Yeah. So moving forward to the rule of law, which is the third, is the third power among the 3 separation of power.
It's not.
It's judiciary, right?
It's not exactly a third power, but I would say it's a concept or an ideal, and it basically means this: no one is above the law. In Malaysia, even our YDPA is not above the law. We have a constitutional monarch, meaning the YDPA only has powers accorded to him within the ambit of the constitution. So no one, you and I, men on the streets, the police, the Prime Minister, everyone is equal before the law.
How efficient the law should be if a country is, have very good check and balances?
Ideally, if a country has very good check and balance, there would be a lot of independence in either in deciding cases or in enacting laws, or even in the execution of laws. Ideally, for example, when it comes to the government, there will not be any selective prosecution, for example. That would be the ideal.
I see. So I'm quite curious about in comes to the judiciary in Malaysia, like a lot of the cases, especially high-profile cases that involve politics, it seems to be very much vague, especially coming from someone who is not not related to the not being trained by law. My question to you is, ideally, what can the public do in terms of trying to address the issues that we have here when it comes to the law itself?
The public or the rakyat, actually, we see them as as a fourth force in all of this, because when the public is aware of what is in the federal constitution, what the government can or cannot do, what the parliaments, their elected representatives should do, what are the court's powers, then they would provide another system of check and balance on all these three institutions. For example, if an elected representative should ideally not vote for the passing of a bill, for example, if his constituents are not supporting it. If he goes against what the people wants, then ideally that law shouldn't have been passed at all.
I see. Yeah. Anything to add on about the separation of powers of in constitutional institutions?
Well, the constitutional institutions are special because their powers and functions come directly from the Constitution. They do not come from an act of Parliament or any statutes. It's direct from the Constitution. So a constitutional institution can only have its functions or powers taken away or increased by amending the Constitution. In general, this would require a 2/3 majority approval of members of the Dewan Rakyat and the Dewan Negara. However, there is an argument that the Parliament cannot change the basic structure of the Constitution so as to abolish constitutional institutions or interfere with their powers in any way, because constitutional institutions are so integral to the basic structure of it. So there are some who argue that the 1988 Judiciary Amendment, for example, should not have been done at all.
Yeah. So I guess there's still a long way to go when it comes to not just the awareness, but in terms of trying to fix our constitutional institutions, right? Earlier on, you mentioned about the Rakyat Guides that I was asking. The number 8 one, I think it's fundamental liberties and
yes,
citizenship.
fundamental liberties and citizenship.
Yeah, I just Googled it at Lambaanku just to make sure.
That's where you would find all the soft copy of it.
Yeah. So we are almost at the end of the show. Anything to add on or your last words?
Well, I would like to say that the My Constitution campaign is working as hard as we can to create awareness, and I think we're quite happy with the results so far, although it can be improved. And if anyone would like to join us, we are one of the few committees in the Bar Council that is actually open to the public, because the Bar Council is committed to create awareness amongst everyone.
Yeah. So when is your next campaign or next training?
Well, we normally our trainings and workshops are quite spontaneous, but we post them all up on our website or on our Facebook page. So if you like our Facebook page or if you go to the website, you can find details of all our upcoming workshops and talks. And
your websites and Facebook page is
called? Our website is perlembagaanku.com, and our Facebook page, you can find us at My Constitution.
I see. That's very good.
And also the iTunes app and the Android that is coming soon.
Yeah, I think I will need to join the trainings as well. It sounds very interesting. Something that I need to know myself as a citizen of Malaysia. So thank you very much, Melissa, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and you are listening now to Durian ASEAN.